okay here?
Yeah, light's great.
How are we doing? Are we ready to go? Yeah, most of the folks on?
Yes, we have Dr. Vernon is on. Welcome.
Okay. All right then. I've got a bell that's my daughter's bell from India. So here we go. Oh, all right. Well, welcome everyone to our first meeting of May 2020. It's great to see everybody and looking forward to a great meeting today. We've got a fantastic speaker. We're going to learn all about the scientific and technological challenges of the 21st century and hopefully how to resolve them, especially a current one that we're dealing with right now. So let me just remind everybody that you're muted by Valerie, our ringmaster, but you can raise your hand for a question, or you can type in a question, text in a question for the speaker, and we'll go forward that way. Just remember that while you are staying in, if you need to shop on Amazon, if you use Amazon Smiles, a portion of the funds will go to fund our Rotary causes. So that's a great thing to do. So let me now turn the meeting over to Charles Edwards for our invocation.
Thank you all. For friends, food, fun, and the fellowship of Rotary, we give our thanks today. Let us always be mindful of the amazing gifts that life has given each of us. Let these thoughts, which I admit I have taken partially from Mark Twain, guide our lives today. Work like you don't need the money. Love like you've never been hurt. Sing like nobody's listening. Dance like nobody's watching, especially for me. Live like it's heaven on earth. Give our talents and treasure that there is no end. Please join me in a pledge of allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, with liberty and justice for all. And one last announcement. The membership survey has been out for almost 2 weeks. We need everybody to complete it. It takes less than 10 minutes. There's only 9 questions. And this is important as we move into next year and as we look to update the strategic plan for the club. I guess the only other item is, other than our speaker, do we have any other guests who have joined us for the meeting? And hearing none, I will pass it back to President Jim. Thanks.
Thanks, Charles. Terrific invocation. Those are great words to reflect upon and live by. And thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. So we're to the cart and happy dollars. So please raise your hand and enter happy dollars in the chat. And who's got some happy news today to share? I'll bet Lynn
Can you hear me?
I bet Lynn Jordan's got some grandchildren news.
I do, but we don't have enough time for me to talk about my grandchildren.
Right,
unless
right.
you want to stay about 2 or 3 hours. We distanced visited yesterday. They sat on the porch and I sat out in the yard and we played with the new adopted dog. So everything is good. Every day's a holiday and every meal is a feast.
That's right, in keeping with the words of Mark Twain, just stated slightly differently. That's a great thought. How about
Hey, Jim.
anybody else?
Jim, it's Kevin Summers. Can you hear me?
Hey, Kevin, I can hear you great.
I just wanted to celebrate my youngest son is graduating this week virtually from NC State, computer science, and he starts his full-time job on Monday, so I couldn't be happier.
Wow, wow, that's fantastic. I have a daughter who's moving to Raleigh June the 6th and moving into an apartment, and she's in need of a job. So, Kevin, if your son finds her a job at the same company, I'll share some happy dollars in June at our next meeting.
Is she a computer science major?
No, she is communications, strategic
Okay.
communications, and I'm sure that his company needs a lot of good communications.
Well, I'll connect them.
All right. Any other happy dollars or, all right, just a reminder for the CART bucket, we are continuing to participate in the battle against Alzheimer's and dementia. So please share any spare dollars, spare change. The Southeast Raleigh Club, the president there last week at their meeting said she likes the kind that jingle, but she prefers the kind that fold. So if you can send some folding money to the CART bucket, to Happy Dollars, that is terrific. Just let Linda know and she'll sign you up. All right, let's see. Few announcements here. Just to remember, okay, next week, our speaker is going to be Burke Kuntz. Burke has got a film that he's produced called Betting on Zero. And Burke is an asset manager here in Raleigh, grew up here in Raleigh, and married a Raleigh girl. And he got involved in this film production project, and it hit big. Betting on Zero, it's a financial docu-thriller. It's on Netflix. It got huge reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, as well as the critics, as well as people who saw it in the theater. So it's a fantastic film. And he's going to talk about, I see his topic is the accidental film producer. So Raleigh boy who makes it big in film production. It'll be a great story, and he's going to show some clips from the film. So that'll be really interesting. And then we've got Rufus Edmiston later this month, the former Attorney General of North Carolina, former North Carolina Secretary of State. He's written a new book, a biography, autobiography. Reagan Weaver, his good friend from law school, is going to introduce him. He wrote about Rotary in his book, and also Reagan Weaver. So that's going to be a fantastic program on May 18. So two great programs coming up. Let me just remind everybody that we have our foundation has donated $1,000 to each of 4 charities. The checks went out last week. So I hope I don't miss one. The Food Bank of Central and Eastern North Carolina, the Dementia Alliance of North Carolina, UNC Rex Healthcare, and the Salvation Army. So we continue to do service even while we're in quarantine. And thank you for everybody, also for your individual donations to those amazing charities. At this time, I will turn the floor over to Christy for membership.
All right. Hello, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. I have a couple items today for membership. First off, we do have a first reading today, which is exciting for a potential new member. It's Dr. Maria Lumpkin. She's the interim president of St. Augustine's University. And in that role, she's the youngest university president and the first female alumni to serve in that role. She's a super impressive woman. She was previously the COO of the university. And we are excited to have her as a potential member. So send any questions or comments my way. I wanted to give you all a heads up about our next virtual Rotary Social. It's going to be May 28th at 5:30 p.m. the Thursday. So it'll be the usual date for our fifth meeting social. So if you guys can join us, we had a lot of fun last time. Good laid back video chat with everyone in Rotary, and bring your own beverage. It'll be fun. So May 28th. And then quick reminder, last week I mentioned that we're forming the Care and Concern Subcommittee, and a couple people have volunteered already. We do need more volunteers, and then I'll send out some more information. But just as a reminder, it's just a little membership committee offshoot. We'll have an old-fashioned phone tree. We'll split up some calls for some of our members that aren't able to be as involved right now, maybe don't have the connectivity to get onto our Zoom calls. Make sure everyone's doing okay during these quarantine times, and check in with them, make them feel connected. So if you're interested, shoot me an email or let me know in the Zoom chat right here, and I will loop everyone in that has volunteered. And that is it for today.
Terrific. Thanks, Christy. Yeah, for anyone who hasn't tried one of the socials, our Zoom social last month was my first, and I'll have to say it was really, really fun. So we had a good turnout, and we all shared what we've been up to during the lockdown, and we talked about favorite Netflix series and movies. I got a great list. I'm looking forward to catching up on that with people later this month. And everybody had their beverage of choice, and it was fun. So tune in May 28th at 5:30 and catch up with your Rotary Club members. It really is fun. All right. So Mark, if Mark is on to talk about the Southeast Raleigh Club and what's happening there.
Sure. Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. This particular update could be given by several folks. Last week we had Jim was on the call, Valerie, as well as Linda. So if I forget anything, please jump in. The Rotary Club in Southeast continues to do well. Last week they had the usual 5-minute member introduction by one of their members, and then just heard the name of Dr. Lumpkin. She gave the presentation last week. She was their speaker and did a fantastic job giving us an update on St. Aug, as well as how COVID-19 has affected them. And one of the things they're doing to prepare for next year is they're holding a fundraiser to raise money for computers for incoming freshmen, so that they're able to still, provide quality education, even though they aren't necessarily on campus or not in the usual manner. So, very inspirational pitch from Dr. Lumpkin last week, and we look forward to having her as a member of our club. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. And Mark's just been doing a terrific job, along with Linda and Eric, staying connected with the club. Charles has helped them with their constitution and bylaws. Tom Packer has worked with their treasurer, and they are really up and running. They've already inducted a couple of members. They're up to 19 members. Their meetings are great. I was on the last one, as you heard, and heard Dr. Lumpkin's amazing talk. Learned that the first stones that were quarried and laid at St. Aug campus were quarried by students in 1867. Just a fact I didn't know. I thought that was so interesting. And they have their challenges now that they're meeting under the quarantine. And I was so impressed with Dr. Lumpkin, and I'm so pleased that she is going to be joining our club. All right, additional announcements. Harrison and Madison Turner have a baby girl, Atlee. She was born on...
Does Gina not have a report?
Well, let's see. That the next thing... Oh, you're right. I scrolled down too fast. So, yeah, let me just finish this one announcement. We'll go straight to Gina.
I have a slide for the baby announcement.
Oh, okay. We're going to go back then. All right, Gina. Gina's on.
Hi, guys. May the 4th be with you. So it is May 4th. So for all of you Star Wars fans out there, I'm wearing my NASA shirt today in honor of May 4th. I didn't have a Star Wars shirt, but wanted to say hi to everybody. Hope everybody is doing well. Have some updates regarding service. So the first one, just so you guys know, April and May, kind of focusing on 2 organizations. One is Rex Hospital, and the other one is the Food Bank of Central and Eastern North Carolina. So just a quick update pertaining to our virtual food drive. We have total raised $2,535. That's broken into 3 different areas. One is online, one is kind of offline, and one is through foundation donations. So that is a great number. I want to congratulate all of you guys for kind of digging deep. I know all of you guys have heard on the news about food banks and the increasing numbers that the food banks have right now because there is just a food shortage. A lot of people have lost their jobs. So thanks for supporting locally to this food bank. There is still time to join our team. The link is at the bottom. I also can email you the link or it'll be provided online. We are, like I said, that was kind of so far for April, 2,535. So maybe we can raise at least $500 more in May to at least get us to 3,000. That would be great. Next slide, Valerie. Okay, so the other one that I'm still highlighting, again, for the month of April and May is UNC Rex Hospital. They're always looking for supplies. Also, donate blood. If you have the opportunity to do that, they are in desperate for that, as well as their COVID response fund. So also want to thank the foundation for their $1,000 towards Rex Hospital and all of you guys who do individual fundraising for Rex Hospital. Thank you. And the last slide, Valerie. Okay, save the date. May 14th, we're going to have a video conference just like we're having today, but it's going to be for the service committee. So what are we going to do at that meeting? We're going to review kind of the projects from this past year. We're also going to roadmap projects for next year, kind of like what our goals, what our focuses are. We're also looking for leaders to chair different kind of projects and programs, as well as talk about the 2021 Day of Service project, which is really exciting. So please save the date. I'll send out something to Linda to send out to the club, as well as remind you next meeting. Thanks guys for your time and have a great day.
Thanks so much, Gina. Great report. We're continuing to do service. All right, now we have Atlee Turner, born April 24th, 8 pounds, 9 ounces. That's a happy looking member, Harrison Turner. And fantastic news. So let's everybody give our warmest welcome to Atlee and congratulations to Harrison and Madison.
Yeah.
That's a cute baby. Almost as cute as Lynn Jordan's grandchildren, I think. Lynn's smiling at that. All right, birthdays. We've got some birthdays. Bill Sigmund, May the 7th. Racine Sinclair, May the 9th. And Lewis Rogers, May the 9th also. And anniversaries, Sean and Emily Doyle on May the 5th, tomorrow, 10 years. So congratulations, Sean and Emily. Yes.
This is Bill Sigmund. I went by to see Bill Simpson yesterday, and he was really doing well. And tomorrow, this coming Thursday at 3:30, Edith is going to have him outside. The weather's supposed to be beautiful, and she was tickled to death when I mentioned that we might try to do a drive-by and toot the horn and everything. And she lit up like a Christmas tree and was really excited. So I would encourage any member that can get by that way to drive by and wave to him. I put the address down. It's 3013 Mayview Road, which is off Dixie Trail.
All right, that's great, Bill. Thank you for that. And Linda, if you can send an email to the members and let them know about that, That's the right kind of drive-by right there.
Yes, I will be
That's a
happy to
great
do that.
idea.
I will
Love
do
that. Love that. I think that's it for announcements. And so we've got a fantastic speaker today, and we've got a wonderful person to introduce our speaker. So Richard Watkins with an introduction.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Let's go ahead and address the elephant on this call. I do have a mustache. The pandemic affects us all very, very differently. I first met today's speaker, and I've known him for about 5 or 6 years now. And we probably crossed paths prior to this, but my earliest memory, I was in Kansas City, Missouri, at the annual Sigma Xi conference, and the conference had reached the final night, and there is, a big banquet and also a award ceremony, and there's just a lot of, pomp and circumstance. And we're sitting there, and he says, Richard, we've been eating, conference fruit the entire day. Let's get out in Kansas City and explore the barbecue scene. And as a fan of barbecue, North Carolina barbecue specifically, I was very eager to check out barbecue in Kansas City. And we went to Arthur Bryant's, which is a famous barbecue place in Kansas City. The line was wrapped around the building, and so we knew it was going to be good. And I should have known at that point that we would be friends from that point on, and we have been. I've had the opportunity of serving on his board of directors as he's gone from editor-in-chief to CEO and president of the organization, or CEO and executive director of the organization. And it's just been absolutely awesome. He's an incredible person. And just so you know what I'm talking about, let me just go over briefly. So Jamie Vernon is the executive director and CEO of Sigma Xi, the Scientific Research Honor Society, and publisher of American Scientist magazine. From 2014 to 2017, he served as Sigma Xi's Director of Science Communications and Publications and Editor-in-Chief of American Scientist. He was also Sigma Xi's Co-Director of Operations from 2014 to 2015. Earlier, Jamie spent more than a decade conducting cell and molecular biology discovery research as a student and research fellow, developing genetic engineering tools, designing and analyzing HIV neutralizing antibodies for vaccine production, and studying the effects of gene duplication and on invertebrate evolution and development. An award-winning science educator, he started communicating science to non-academic audiences in 2004 as a public speaker and independent blogger. While pursuing a career in biotechnology, he regularly contributed articles to The Intersection, a Discover magazine blog about science and policy. He changed his career emphasis from research to science policy and communications by serving as an American Association for the Advancement of Science, or AAAS, Science and Technology Policy Fellow, and subsequently as an Oak Ridge Institute for Science and Education Fellow at the U.S. Department of Energy. His primary role at DOE was to improve the measurement and communication of the economic impacts of the department's $2.7 billion annual investment in clean and efficient energy technologies. In 2011, he helped launch DOE's National Clean Energy Business Plan competition. He was the co-chair of digital media from 2012 to 2013 for an interagency climate communications working group within the White House's U.S. Global Change Research Program. In 2014, he co-founded Potential Energy, DC, an energy business startup accelerator based in Washington, DC. Jamie holds a BS in zoology from North Carolina State University, for all you Wolfpack people out there, and an MS in biotechnology from East Carolina University, and a PhD from the University of Texas at Austin. Without further ado, Rotarians, I'd like to introduce Jamie Vernon.
Wow, thank you, Richard. That's an incredible introduction. And that night that we had barbecue was a great night, because wherever you go, there's always a unique barbecue, and it's it's not North Carolina barbecue except on the Eastern Coast. So thank you for that introduction. And to the Rotarians here today, I've enjoyed the conversations thus far. It really feels like you're as much a family as you are a group. And being a North Carolina boy, it's nice to be able to get back in touch with you again. I feel like I spend so much time on the national scene, traveling around the country and around the world on behalf of Sigma Xi, which is a national presence and an international organization. And as Richard said, I'm a graduate of NC State, so it's nice to hear some Wolfpack folks online, and congratulations to the individual whose son is coming or graduating. That was fantastic. You may not know where Sigma Xi is located, but we're essentially in the heart of RTP. So we're right across from the Frontier Center, if you know the area very well, which is close to the Research Triangle Foundation. And I have been to multiple RTP Rotary meetings, but never a Raleigh Rotary meeting. So thank you for having me today. And Richard, thank you for recommending me for this opportunity. Your mustache is very impressive. But to get started with the background that Richard gave, I'd like to, sort of build on the fact that I have this diverse experience from scientific research to policy to communications, as well as some entrepreneurial activities. I don't know if I'll be able to share my screen. Is that a possibility? I do have a presentation.
Yes, it is. Okay, let me transfer some control over to you.
Okay.
All right. Linda, you're going to have to do that. You're the host of record on this one.
And I really want to treat this talk, I didn't know the background of everyone in the club, so I tried to keep it at a high level, but I do consider presentations to general audiences as jumping off points for conversation. So I look forward to taking any questions that you have as we go through the presentation, or if at the end, I'm going to leave some time for that. But you'll see that this presentation draws from my experience in a variety of worlds, whether it's research or policy. And being a biologist by training, I transitioned to energy, which was a huge leap. As you can imagine, going from molecular biology lab to the physics of clean energy technology, that was quite a leap. And it was an important leap for me because I consider climate change to be one of the most pressing issues facing humanity. So it looks like I have control here. I want to make sure, can everyone see that? Yes? Okay. So I'm using as the theme, and I was glad to hear that you talked about Netflix and movies and even May the 4th coming up today, because I really view movies as a creative effort that we use to envision the future. And so the title of this talk is Science in the 21st Century. And this is an image from 2001 Space Odyssey at the very end of the movie, when the young human fetus is looking back at Earth. And it leaves a lot for us to think about what our future should look like. So in movies, we've taken a variety of approaches in representing the future. And what's interesting is looking back at movies that from our childhood, my childhood, and more recently, and how in some cases we've actually achieved or reached the technologies that are there, and in other cases where we've fallen short. So in many cases, movies reflect the future in an apocalyptic way. If you've ever seen Escape from New York, you know it's a drama, very action-oriented and very chaotic. Blade Runner, similarly, is an apocalyptic type future, but highly technologically advanced. WALL-E takes us into 2085, where it looks like robots basically run the world and humans have taken a back seat to the technology. And of course, we all grew up knowing the Jetsons. and all the incredible technologies they had, from their space travel to robots in the home. So these are all representations of how we sort of look to the future, or how we anticipate the future to be. Some of us are fans of Back to the Future, I'm sure, with Michael J. Fox, where the professor converted a DeLorean vehicle into a time travel machine, and he went into the future. And I don't know if you remember from the film what year was considered the future that had this particular imagery, including flying cars and other wild technologies, but it was actually 2015. So here we are in 2020, 5 years past the date that Marty McFly originated, and you can see that we haven't adopted all of those technologies. And I have to say, as a kid, the number one thing I wanted was that hoverboard that was supposed to replace skateboards. And I'm wondering to this day how I can get one. And the truth is that it comes down to science and technology. Nobel laureate Denis Gabor, 1971 Nobel Prize winner for inventing essentially holographs, says that the future cannot be predicted, but it can be invented. And so when we have these films that we create and a vision for the future, a lot of times we try to bring that into reality, or by accident we bring it into reality. I mentioned earlier 2001 A Space Odyssey, which is really an influential film both for filmography and for science, but it obviously influenced what we know about space life today. So this film was produced in 1968, but was supposed to represent just 2001, and you know we're 19 years past that. So the closest we've come to the experience of the Space Odyssey is, let's see if I'm frozen for a second. Ooh. There we go. Is the International Space Station. And this is how the space station looked in 2019. So you can see the similarities to the vision that Stanley Kubrick had in his film and what the reality is for human technology. If you look back to 1958, you can see that you may remember these cartoons that ran in the Sunday papers, Closer Than We Think. And here's an example of a student using essentially a digital classroom at home, which was for them an incredible future. And it's amazing what we know today, especially during the COVID outbreak. All of our kids are at home essentially using the technologies that were predicted 40, 50 years ago. In the same time frame, they were predicting electric cars. It was very futuristic for them to imagine a car that ran on electricity, but obviously with Tesla and a variety of other auto manufacturers, we're moving in that direction. Another interesting prediction was bloodless surgery. And I don't know if we have any MDs in the group, but you may know that telemedicine is very much a reality. Here you have remote surgery being conducted. And so these visions become reality. We create the world that we envision. And so when we look to the future, we have to ask ourselves, what do we want the future to look like? And how do we get there? And I would argue, as a scientist who understands what the opportunities are and the potential of science, that it's really about investing in science and using ethics and integrity to guide the way that we use that technology. So when we look to the future in film, examples like Passenger are about leaving Earth. This is a movie about individuals who are put into a static state and they're flown for hundreds or thousands of years into the deep space, and it's about leaving Earth. Even the recent movie with Matthew McConaughey, The Martian, was about establishing a colony on Mars. So the idea is that we see the future as otherworldly, not our planet. But we know that we only have one Earth. We know that we have only one planet. And so we have to understand what this planet represents. It is unique in the universe. And it is diverse and complicated. And humans have made it more complicated because our behavior has a variety of impacts on how we treat and use the planet. And so as we go into the future, we know that we're going to continue to add human beings to the planet. The population is increasing. We're very rapidly approaching 9 billion people on the earth, and that obviously puts some strains on the planet for resources. We're becoming a more connected world. It's interesting, these numbers seem staggering. 500 million smartphones were sold in 2010, 350 million computers. These numbers are continuing to go up. So we're talking about hundreds of millions of connected devices, and there's 8 billion people on the planet, so not everyone has access. But those who do can now reach around the world, whether they're in Africa or whether they're in Moscow. They can contact you in New York City or Raleigh, North Carolina with the click of a button. This all seemed amazing 50 years ago. If you look at the world, we're also much more mobile. So we have about 90 million cars manufactured annually, and we travel trillions of kilometers on planes annually. So we're mixing it up, we're coming together. We are not staying in the same place as we did in the past. And all of this mobility is changing the way we interact with one another and the implications for a variety of things. We also know that the planet is warming. We know that we're in the ballpark of 1 degree now, or approaching 1 degree, and we're looking at 1 to 2 degrees over the next 50 to 100 years. So what does that mean to the future? And so presentation today is about the challenges that we're facing on a more crowded, more connected, more mobile, and warmer world. How are we going to manage that? So the 3 that I picked, because of, if I were to go, I could give you 20 top issues, but 3 that I wanted to talk about that I could cover in this time frame are related to finance, and that's cybersecurity, environment, climate change, and global health. I picked pandemics because we're obviously in the midst of a pandemic right now, and they're going to continue in the future. So when you think about cybersecurity, what's actually the problem? Well, the top 10 types of online fraud range from a Nigerian letter fraud, which is basically asking people to write them a check, to auction fraud, where people are driving up prices or using fake personalities to buy products online. So there's a variety of different forms of online fraud. And in the United States, we lose about $500 billion every year to online fraud. Cybersecurity is a very serious problem. And a lot of this is related to personal identity. So there's a lot of identity fraud that goes on, and that is very tied to encryption and protection of private information. And there's a technology that's looming on into the future that's going to greatly affect this, and that is quantum computing. So whereas computers today are essentially binary, your transistors deliver a 1 or a 0 as part of a code, the future of computing is going to be based on qubits. And these are essentially infinite positions for information to be transferred. It's based on quantum entanglement and superposition, and essentially rather than just 2 messages, it can send an infinite number. So to make sense out of this, it's as if you understand how a computer would work today to read through a phone book, it would have to go through it line by line and read each individual line as fast as the computer could process that. A quantum computer could read the entire phone book at one time. So you can imagine the amount of information that can be processed much more quickly. And so if you have a password on your bank account, and I can use quantum computer to decode your password much more quickly, then I can access every password on the internet in a very short period of time. So the future of computing and the future of cybersecurity is very dependent on who gets quantum computing technology first, because there are going to be malevolent actors who use this technology and break codes to their advantage. And if we don't have a counter quantum computer that can create codes faster than the opposition, then codes become, or passwords become meaningless. So the problem is, who's going to win this race? Well, the race really started in 1981, and as you can see on this timeline from 81 to 2017, we've gradually developed the technology of quantum computing. And so the first quantum byte was in 2005, and IBM has successfully tested a 16-qubit quantum computer in 2017. And there's two or three teams in the United States that are among the leading teams. So we have confidence that the United States is a strong player in this space. However, I visited Moscow and went to the Russian Quantum Center, and the CEO of the Russian Quantum Center told me personally that their goal is to catch up to the United States. And at some point, the technology will become a national security technology. So I know this firsthand. This is happening. Now, what's interesting is our rival in this space is really China. In terms of patents, China is the #1 submitter of patents related to quantum technology. So the United States has a challenge technologically to keep up with the rest of the world. Now on climate change, you probably hear about this a lot, so you may be more familiar with this issue. But I just like to reiterate that in the year 2000 and since the year 2000, we've seen a dramatic increase in the carbon emissions in the United States and the accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Corresponding to that is the global mean increase in temperature with the Earth. And the overwhelming body of evidence in science says that these two are linked and that carbon emissions and greenhouse gases are driving the global warming. And there are no other major inputs that are driving this. You know, they looked at this, the power, the energy of the sun, that's fluctuating. In fact, the sun's energy right now is down while the temperatures are going up. So there's a variety of inputs that people have looked at, and none of them can account for what's happening except for the greenhouse gases. And why do we care about climate change? We care about climate change because we have built our entire society on our coasts. Major portions of our society, look at Manhattan on your right of your screen and Honolulu on your left, you can see that to protect this infrastructure is going to be trillions and trillions of dollars, more than we would ever spend today on clean energy technology. If we could invest today in clean energy and slow the growth, then we won't have to build dams and walls in the future to protect our cities. So it's a trade-off. Are we going to wait and build walls to protect our city, or are we going to take action today and slow the effects of climate change? And when I'm showing you these cities built on the ocean, it's because we know that the warming is melting our glaciers, and the glaciers are going into the sea, and the seas are rising. And as the temperature increases, that water expands. So not only are we adding more liquid water to the oceans, but we're expanding it because with temperature increases, water expands. And so that's going to expand onshore as well as rise. So we have some serious problems related to this. Now, what are the solutions? Well, we know science is advanced to the point where we can capture carbon from the atmosphere. This is a highly inefficient process, and at the moment, it's not economically feasible. So it costs a lot more money to capture this carbon in a plant like this than it does to stop producing the carbon. So for now, this is not a feasible project even to scale up and capture that carbon. I mean, a lot of people think about trees as a carbon sequestration method, but really we can't grow enough trees to offset the amount of carbon we've put into the air in recent years. So we have to look at a full portfolio. We can do carbon sequestration, we can do tree planting, but we also have to look at alternative energy sources. We know that solar and wind and biomass are all carbon neutral or carbon negative energy sources. And so we have to look at those as an option. Now, what's interesting is that the investments from the federal government into renewable energy technologies has driven down the cost significantly. You can see the cost of solar has really plummeted in recent years. And so it's becoming cheaper and cheaper to create electricity this way. And wind has also come down, and other forms of energy have also gotten cheaper. At this point, they're competitive with the existing energy infrastructure of coal and gas and other fossil fuel-based energies. And so with modeling the energies in the energy sector, we're able to predict if we were to continue to follow the path that we've been following, we can offset the energy sector and replace our fossil fuel usage by 2040 with entirely renewable energy, if we were to invest fully and deploy those technologies as fast as possible. So it is feasible that we could do this. However, if we fail, if we do not slow the warming at a sufficient rate, and we start to see cities inundated with water, there are other more extreme measures that we might need to take. For example, geoengineering. I've already mentioned carbon capture, and that essentially you capture it, you inject it into the ground. But we can also genetically modify trees so that they absorb more carbon over time. And I'm sure that I know there are scientists working on this. There's also aerosols that we can spray into the atmosphere that would reflect the sun's energy back up into space. So it would never reach the ground. The sun's energy would be reflected. Now, we haven't done enough research on this to know if there's long-term implications, but these are the extreme measures we'll have to take if at some point we start to see some serious negative effects from, or runaway, what we call runaway global warming. We can also do things like using seawater in heating plants to add clouds that reflect the sunlight, and we can fertilize the oceans to create algal blooms that would then suck carbon dioxide or carbon out of the oceans as well as the air while the blooms grow. But we don't know what those blooms, the effect of those blooms might be because they would obviously take oxygen as well from other organisms, and that there's all kinds of complicated interactions there. Now I'm shifting gears to global health. I mentioned that pandemics are a problem. But when you put the pandemics in the context of other health problems globally, you can see that cardiovascular disease is really the #1 form of death on the planet. Cancers are next, other respiratory diseases, diabetes, dementia, and then you start to see your first level of infections. Now, right now, we're less than 1 million COVID-19 deaths. But we may approach that by the end of this thing. And that would put COVID-19 up in one of the higher levels of the overall global death in a single year. But you can see HIV on here takes about 1 million people annually. Malaria takes about 700,000 people annually. So these numbers are large with infections. And so we need to have protections related to the spread of virus. This is just to remind you of the spread of COVID-19. We know that it originated in China, but it's breathtaking, actually, when you look at this map and see how widespread the virus is now, and in some cases, how large those infection hotspots have become. Now, what's shocking for me is that we've had the infrastructure to prevent the COVID-19 pandemic spread the way that it has. And I cannot explain why that system failed. It was in place. And you can see here that there are teams worldwide who track outbreaks. This is an influenza surveillance system, but there are systems for novel diseases as well. And this system is in place to protect us from the pandemics like COVID-19. But for whatever reason, the alarms didn't go off when they needed to, and the mechanisms of action were not taken to protect us. And I really can't say what the breakdown was, but we can say that there was some delay, obviously, in China in communicating. But previously, we had American teams in China tracking these types of viruses. But those teams, I don't think, are there anymore. I think the funding was removed and they were brought back to the United States. So things like that create opportunities for pandemics to spread. And those who think that this virus is unexpected. In 2015, Bill Gates gave a TED Talk, and I recommend that you watch it, on the threat of pandemics, and he explained exactly what we're currently seeing for COVID-19, exactly how it would happen from an animal to a human, and once it was able to be transmissible from one human to another, it would travel around the world. And as long as we have no immunity to that virus, because it's a completely new virus, there's nothing to stop the spread of that except surveillance, containment, and quarantines, essentially. So we failed on that. I mean, we have to accept that. We did not do what we knew was going to happen. We were not prepared for it. But if we had followed the systems that we know exist, and this is not a new chart that I'm proposing here. This is an old chart. It just is evidence that we had the system in place. What you would have is a team in a foreign country, and whenever there's a novel infection or an outbreak, you would have a molecular-based surveillance that would immediately try to catch that virus and get a sample, and they would isolate the virus, they would sequence the genome. Once they sequence the genome, they will look at the DNA sequence, and they will understand the mutation rate of the virus to make sure that it's not mutating fast, or to identify it. And once they've identified it, then it triggers the public health countermeasures. And those would be immediately launching the diagnostic testing that should have been done in the United States very early. This system was in place. That diagnostics testing that should have been deployed within weeks of the acknowledgement of the new virus should have been nationally created. So once you understand you have the virus, you sequence it, you know what you're looking for, then you can create the diagnostics. And once the diagnostics are in place, you track everywhere that you have a suspicious case. And once you do that, you can contain, because you can do what's called contact tracing, and you can identify every person that individual contacted, and all of those people would be contained. And that would prevent the spread of the virus. So we did not do that for COVID-19, and like I said, I can't explain it. But so once you've got that information, then you can actually move to gain of function research, which is, let's try to predict if this virus is going to mutate, and if it mutates, how we're going to track it and respond to that. So that feeds back into the system. But like I said, this system exists. We should have used it better. And now we're learning what the risks are for future pandemics. And hopefully we will not make these mistakes again in the future. But what's great is that we still have a very strong research enterprise and huge investments in the science related to this. So in regards to COVID-19, there are 41 new diagnostic tests for this virus. And if you think about it, this virus was not known as a risk to humans 6 months ago. So in the last 6 months, 41 new diagnostic tests have been created. 23 pharmaceuticals or other treatments have been developed and are in the works of being studied. So they're in clinical trials. And then there's at least 5 vaccines that are underway. And so in terms of the phase development, so just to give you an idea, we have about 6 of the potential treatments in phase 2, but we have several that are much earlier than that and a few that are a little later than that. It takes months to go through each of these stages. So when Anthony Fauci says we're going to have a vaccine in a year, he's talking about starting here at the observational stage, and all the time it takes to get through phase 4, which is the final test, and then eventually use. So each of those stages takes 3 to 6 months in normal circumstances, but they're trying to push this stuff through. Now, there's always risk when you rush through the process, because you might have a vaccine that's not particularly safe. I don't think the FDA would allow that to hit the human population, but that's the concern. With rushing things, you might add risk to the situation. My hope is that they will find something that's very successful very soon. In terms of vaccines, we have a variety of different forms of vaccines. So we call those vaccine platforms. So you can either take the DNA of the virus and use that as an antigen to create an immune response in the system, or you can take proteins from the virus. That could be used as an antigen. There's a variety of different platforms that we use to trigger an immune response in the human body that would then allow you to have immunity to that virus. But each of those, all of the ones that you see down there, 3 DNA vaccines, 1 inactivated, which means a virus that's been heated so that it's not active, but it still has the structure that your body might recognize and create an immunity to. All of these different vaccines have to go through studies as well. And so this is a very complicated situation, but it's promising that we have 41 candidates already. And the only way that that could possibly be true is because they have identified that this virus has similarity to other viruses, and they've been able to take those DNA sequences or those proteins, and they already had them at some stage of development to then roll them out quickly to the public. So in conclusion, I want to talk about the importance of the research enterprise. And you can see here, this is mainly focused for the development of pharmaceuticals. But at the core of this are the pharmaceutical companies and the government. And those two entities are really the funding agencies or entities for the research that goes on. They support the research at the university, they support the research at the companies, at the research sites. And it's important that we continue to invest because we need that surveillance system in place, and we need to be able to activate it as needed. Similarly on clean energy, this applies as well. The government and the private sector work collaboratively to produce the technologies we need. And it's worth saying that the government funds things that corporations will never do because the risk is too high. A company that has stockholders that it's beholden to, it cannot take on risks. The federal government will invest in those things because it believes in the general expansion of knowledge will lead to new technologies. And so it's important that the government is willing to take those risks while the pharmaceutical companies are allowed to build on the successes of basic research and create technologies that will ultimately be lucrative business opportunities as well as great technologies for the public. So we need this entire network, this ecosystem, if you will. And if you look at the research funding in recent years, you can see going from left to right that the dollar numbers are going down. So by dollars, it's actually going down. But I'm sorry, in dollars it's going up, but in terms of the share of the federal budget, it's going down. So the rest of the world is estimated that we should invest about 2 to 3% of our GDP in research. And China is doing about 2 to 3%. The United States is doing less than that. We're doing about 1%. So we have a lot of work to do to be competitive. You can see here that in the 60s, we were, I don't know, you may know why this funding level was so high. That actually is the space race. But since we went to the moon, we succeeded, we planted the flag, and we called victory, we have allowed our investments in research to go down as a factor, as a percentage of GDP over the years. So the threat, the external threat that the USSR posed to the United States at the time was so significant that we were willing to invest. But there's a perception that we don't have that external threat anymore. And I would argue differently. We need to be investing in research in order to be always prepared for any of the risks that might come. And just to give you some idea of the scale of things, so the entire Apollo space program cost about $24 billion at the time, which is now about $150 billion. And just to put that in perspective, we just had legislation for, $500 billion, $500 billion for PPP funding to support payroll. But 150 billion in the entire Apollo space program has led to a massive technological advancement and the start of huge opportunities for technology transfer. We led to more than the 1,500 successful spin-off companies, including heart monitors, solar panels, cordless innovation. More recently, we've seen a private sector American space industry, Elon Musk and SpaceX. obviously this is all spinoffs of that original $150 billion. And we're talking in the trillions of benefits there. Now, in 1988 to 2003, we sequenced the human genome for about $5.7 billion. And since that time, we've generated about $1 trillion in economic output based on that initial $5 billion. So if you were an investor and you could invest $5 billion and get $1 trillion, I think you would appreciate the significance of investing in scientific research. So when we look to the future, we have to think about what we want that future to be. And our best indicator of how we look to the future are these apocalyptic films, like Mad Max. Now, I believe that if we were to sufficiently invest in science and technology the way that we should, we could solve a lot of problems that we're facing and create a better future. And we could live in something that looks more like this than the Mad Max scenario. So thank you for your time. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Jim, am I supposed to handle questions?
I think Valerie is.
Okay.
Yeah,
Jim, you need to unmute.
anything that comes over the chat, I'll handle. If anyone has a question, if you want to just activate your microphone or raise your hand.
I have one. First of all, thank you so much for that excellent program. It was really informative, and you made complicated subjects understandable. So thank you. I was just wondering, do you, in your opinion, do you think that this pandemic, that one silver lining from it is that people are actually seeing skies are bluer because there's less cars on the road, and they can physically see the difference, especially in cities, that, you know, this is a real thing? Do you think that might help your argument?
The answer is yes, that people can visualize the impact that humans have on their environment. And I think that that's critical for us to deliver the message that if we had cleaner technologies, we wouldn't have some of those byproducts. More of a silver lining is that if that's the case, and if that were to hold for a while, there are deaths associated with that type of pollution. So asthma deaths, for example, increase in areas where there's higher traffic, where there's more emissions from vehicles. And so yes, you know, not only is it something in terms of a messaging, but it's also a reality that the pollutants that we do create through our human activities are dangerous to others. And so yeah, there is a silver lining to it, and I hope that we take that away and we support those decisions in the future.
Thank you.
Looks like Elsa has a question.
Yes, first of all, I absolutely loved your presentation.
Thank you.
As somebody who's been a frontline fundraiser, I've had the privilege to work at a academic university back in Detroit who does a tremendous amount of research, and worked with Dr. Scott Dolchowski, who really formed a partnership with NASA back in 2005 and was instrumental in putting ultrasound machines up in space so astronauts could diagnose their medical problems. But in terms of the research side of medicine and the R&D, can you explain, I know that oftentimes people will rail at the cost of pharmaceutical drugs, saying that they're much too high. So the question would be, how much of that money goes into R&D?
Yeah, so my understanding is that about 60% of the revenues go into R&D. A big chunk, and a lot of people criticize pharmaceutical companies for this, but a huge chunk of it goes into marketing. So they have to sell the products. But pharmaceuticals are expensive, especially prior to going generic, because of the research that has to go into them. It's very expensive. I showed you all the steps that it takes to produce a single product. And what you also don't see is that I'm definitely estimating here, but in the high 80s, 90% of the research fails. So there's a lot of failure that's funded by those few drugs that succeed. So if you have 500 drugs that are in development and 5 of those actually make it to the market, it's the 5 that succeed that pay for the research to go through the 500 just to find those 5. So I can't always justify the business model for the pharmaceutical companies, but I can speak to the challenge and the difficulty that exists in taking a product from basic to the market. And that is a huge investment.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I see Jen.
Yeah, I have a question. So when I was an undergraduate, we studied the Malthus and the Malthus theory from, I think maybe the 1800s, was that we were headed towards overpopulation. Overpopulation would strain resources on the planet, leading to all of these sorts of issues that we're now discussing. So overpopulation, so we're now heading towards 9 billion people, heading towards 10 billion people. That seems kind of a root cause, continuing to overpopulate the planet. Are we making any progress on that issue?
Well, there are some folks who believe that overpopulation is a problem, and the solution for the future is to reduce population. What we know is that education, especially among women, education and opportunity reduces the number of children that those women will have, because especially in developing world, women have children, because there's not access to birth control, there's not education, it's part of being a mother in those countries, and that's resources that can support the family. And so they still have the model, you may know of families from your childhood who had 8 or 9 children. And that was a carryover from when we were very much an agricultural economy, and you needed those large families to take care of the farm, right? It makes sense to do that. The truth is that we're seeing, and the predictions are that in about 20 years, as the world further develops, the rate of fertility is going to go down, meaning that the developing countries, the number of children will go down because of education and access to things. But another part of this is that it's really about unequal distribution of resources and wealth. So if the technologies that are available that we know exist were deployed equally around the world, we wouldn't have the issue of emissions. We wouldn't have food shortages. It's just access that creates the problem that a lot of people speak of. And so if we were to take on these issues in a social way and deliver the technologies equitably and the resources equitably, then I think that we wouldn't have to worry about 9 billion people. We would be able to manage that very well. There are issues, there's a lot of pushback politically. I'm just going to put that out there. There's a political pushback to this concept of shared wealth, if you will, shared access. That creates some challenges for a capitalistic system, which I appreciate. I mean, it's very real. And we want to build a system that does the best it can, that can continue to grow economically while giving more access to the global population.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Usually we stop at 1:30, but this has been so fascinating. No one wants to end the program. So one more question for Dr. Vernon.
I have a question. Jim is Wilson Heyman.
All right, fire away.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Dr. Vernon, thank you for a terrific talk. It's been so engrossing and topical. How do you explain, or what are your thoughts about the rising sentiment that seems to be anti-science and anti-medical technology? It seems like that's one of our problems, that people, don't believe in vaccines, don't believe that the scientific physicians who say that we need to quarantine is going to help. There's a kind of a pushback, and you feel like back in the 1920s.
Yeah.
We haven't come very far.
Right. Well, there was a period in American history where science was really lauded, and to be a scientist was viewed as honorable in the population, and it was highly desirable. And a lot of this came out of the development of the polio vaccine, the Apollo missions to the moon. Those were viewed as huge victories for the nation. I think in recent years, there's been a sense, and this goes back to the previous question, there's been a sense that the benefits of science have not reached the broader public. And because people don't feel that they're advancing as fast as the investments that we make in science, and those things are not trickling down to them, there's a little pushback to say, well, it's just not working for me. I don't see why I should support science if I'm not getting the benefits of it. And so this allows for people to start to question. I also think that there is an counterintuitive effect of technology, successful technology. We've built a very healthy American culture. And because of vaccines, for example, and because of health advances. And so people are now at a point where they don't remember the times when their neighbor had polio. They don't remember when the family down the street lost 3 kids to smallpox. So they think that there's no need for these vaccines. And that's a problem, because our success has become our greatest challenge. We have to now argue the case that this technology is necessary, rather than it being self-evident because it saves people's lives right there, in their neighborhoods. And obviously there, again, these are complex issues, but there's also business interests. There's people will lose, or companies will lose, as new technologies come online. And that's the issue with the fossil fuel industry. They cannot allow renewable energy technologies to replace them because their businesses cannot survive in that environment. So they have an interest in, encouraging pushback against these new technologies and making those arguments, which I understand. That is the capitalistic system that we live in. But the truth is, the status quo does not want to change if there are benefits built into that status quo. If technology means you lose your advantage, you're going to oppose that technology. And I think that that's just an issue we have to reconcile with in the United States and around the planet. But it's a constant, case for us to make. This technology is better for these reasons, and we need to adopt it. And otherwise, we continue to experience what we're experiencing. And I can't say much more than that.
Dr. Vernon, really want to thank you. One of the most interesting talks we've had, and would love to have you back maybe next year and for an update on some of these topics.
Yeah.
Because they're so important to keep our eye on how we're going to be sustainable and build a better future for all people. So we thank you very much for all you're doing and for giving us such a great program today. And thank Richard Watkins for bringing you as our speaker. And we look forward to having you back.
Thank you.
So Rotarians, and Richard, I'm going to leave it to you to deliver the coveted Rotary coffee mug to Dr. Vernon. He's going to need to have a good cup of Java in the morning to cover all these topics that he's dealing with. All right, so Rotarians, we will close our program today as we do each time with the Rotary four-way test. And so if you'll join me in this: first, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you.
All right, Rotarians.
R-O-T-A-R-Y. That spells Rotary. Very good.
Okay.
Nice.
All right, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.